nations. Unceded means stolen, that the indigenous people of this land never legally signed away their territories to Canada, and the land was taken by force when Europeans came here. It is the responsibility of all non-indigenous people to recognize and respect this fact. We're really happy to have this event, and it's our honor to have Professor Diana Lary here. And our monitor today is Jing Liu, Chinese Studies Librarian of the UBC Asian Library. And she's also a many years friends of mine. Yeah, and thank you so much to Jing. Without her support and help, we wouldn't have such a wonderful event. So please join me, give her a warm welcoming.
Diana is more thoughtful, asked me to survey in this room how many people are Mandarin speaking or Chinese speaking only. Oh, okay. Then my English introduction is up there, so I'll run in Chinese quickly. Professor Lary, it's my great honor to introduce Diana first. Diana 呢是在我刚加入 UBC 的时候就认识她，就是特别慈祥，所以一下子就变成了朋友。她那个时候是在这个亚太研究所的中国研究中心任主任，而且在研究一个非常重大的课题，就是香港的移民 （Immigrants from Hong Kong）。然后她同时呢又帮助亚洲图书馆挽救了或者抢救了很多的中文的古籍啊、华人的档案啊。如果没有她出手，很多就这样散失了。所以作为 librarian， 我对她也是感觉她的贡献非常大。那她作为一个在加拿大或者在西方研究中国问题的一个中国近现代史的一个专家呢，他的贡献主要突出在不是非常宏大的历史叙事，它是深入进个人、家庭、邻里，尤其是被忽视的这个女性群体的这个研究。那他的研究又很有这个幽默感，他的这个写作，我觉得特别好玩的就是，我也做他的口述史，因为我有一个汉学家的口述史项目。An oral history studies project led by UCLA, and I've been interviewing Diana, and she told me her story when she was taking the 绿皮火车 cross Siberia to Beijing to teach English. 在那个火车上好玩的好多是他写在 Times 上，那个《泰晤士报》上那个文章就特别好玩，所以他一直延续这个风格。然后在80年代呢，他又是驻北京加拿大驻北京大使馆里面的汉学家，常驻汉学家。大家都知道80年代末发生了什么事，然后他在那儿又帮助很多加拿大人撤离呀。然后他又做了的贡献呢，就是帮助中加两国的文化上的、历史上的这个交流，起到了这个桥梁的作用。然后作为在 UBC 跟他共同工作过很多的这个师生呢，对他的印象就是他最打动我们的就是他非常的慷慨和大度，对我们的帮助 mentorship。我写了这个当地华侨家族的书，他是第一个看到的，他就说太好了，不是一贯的强调被种族歧视，而是说在那个环境里面，这个有这么多的华人、个人、家族和群体取得了这么多的成就，应该强调这方面。还有就是在疫情之后 ，post-COVID, right after the library reopened, the first visiting scholar or professor is Diana, who walked in with 白先勇签字的书. Yeah, from her friend 白先勇 to the library, donated to the library. So we really enjoyed the chat, huh, Diana, from my office to outdoor to the parkade. So 他那个今天要讲的这本书就是一个例子，就是他被很久和被很多人都忽视的 grandmothers 这个群体，他可以充满感情的去写出来分享，然后又比较了中西两种文化中的不同。那个，所以他今天会自己主动讲他这个书，我就先留下，先不提那方面。These are not all of her publications, but some of them were selected and posted here. Look at them. 战争、流离、创伤、移民，中国国内的移民，还有就是华人移民到海外来的这些著作。好吧，那我的介绍就到这儿。Hi, Professor Gu Xiong. More old friends are coming. I just finished introducing Professor Lary and inviting Professor Lary to talk about her new book, China's Grandmothers.
Ladies and gentlemen, 各位在座的，我非常高兴看到你们来听我关于中国的祖母、外祖母、奶奶、姥姥、公公等等的。I just want to say how glad I am to see you all here today so that I can talk about grandmothers. You may have noticed, some of you, in Chinese I had to use many different words for grandmother because Chinese personal relations, family relations, are much more precise than English ones. But in any case, I'm assuming that many of you here are grandchildren, and some of you may even be grandmothers. I know I'm certainly looking at a grandmother now, and a grandfather, but we'll leave the grandfather slightly apart. This is work that I started only after I'd retired, and when I retired, or very shortly after I retired, before I retired, my beloved first grandchild, Mabel, was born, Meibao in Chinese. And subsequently, I got two more. And I was so amazed by how happy I was, how delighted I was to have my grandchildren. And I began to think of two things that always puzzled me about Chinese societies. One was why women did not retire very early in China. At that time, women retired at 50, and now it's a bit older, but not much. The other was, it always made me sad, the separation between small children and their parents. So the first time I worked in China, the woman I worked with, my peitong, she had a child who was far away in Shanghai. I was in Beijing. And this child, she saw once a year. I couldn't understand it. And I was obviously quite ignorant at the time. But it took me a long while to put the two things together, that women retired earlier than men, and that when they did retire, their own children had given their babies to their parents to be cared for. Part of the reason I got that wrong was we were always encouraged to think that this is in the 1960s, before the Cultural Revolution, we thought that children lived in happy yoryang and creches. That actually was because people were frequently taken to see them, and they were charming little children with not a parent in sight. That, of course, turned out to be only a few of the children. So here I am, retired with grandchildren of my own, and so happy, and I began to think, what has been written about this, and I discovered almost nothing. There were many, many books on the suffering of women in China, many books about, I'm sorry to say, prostitution, an enormous number, many books about everything bad that ever happened to women, and I couldn't find one on grandmothers, so I thought, well, I better do it. And then COVID came, and so I was at home all the time, and so I did it mainly from, not from library sources, but mainly from what was available online. Oh, what I came up with, one of the things I came up with, this is one of China's most famous modern artists. Anybody like to tell me who this is? Feng Zikai. He painted cartoons, they're sometimes called manhua. And this wonderful picture, for me, captures the love of a grandmother for her grandchild. It's probably a boy. Almost, if you could go back to the cover of the book, so I want to show you, it's always assumed that people preferred boy grandchildren, and indeed in the cover, you can see, I managed to do this with great difficulty. I looked at thousands of pictures of grandchildren, and of a grandmother holding a grandchild. Almost every one, the child was wearing red, i.e., was a boy. Finally, I found one who's wearing yellow. This could actually be a boy or a girl, but it's not specifically a boy. Now, when I saw that love in the Feng Zikai picture, this is what being a grandmother should be like. I'll give you all a moment or two to work out who this is. This tiny lady at the front is the grandmother of 10 children, all born to one father and one mother. Very unusual. At the time, as you can see, I'm sure you've all realized at once, this is during the Resistance War. This could only be in the early 1940s. And this dear lady has just passed her 90th birthday. I'd like to give a prize for anybody who can recognize who her son is. Speak up more loudly. General Bai Chongxi, the most famous military mind of the Kuomintang side, and right in the middle of the war, he went down to, this is taken in Guilin, South China, with his whole family and many hangers-on as well, to celebrate the 90th birthday, the 90大寿. It's a really important birthday because very few people make it or made it in those days. So here he is. I don't think I can't recognize quite which one is by Shen Yong, but he's one of these boys over here. The mother is holding one of the youngest, and there is the incredibly handsome General Bai in the center. This party was attended by all kinds of other senior generals, despite the fact that there was a war going on, because this was the best picture I could possibly find of celebrating a grandmother. I don't think even the Queen got such a big... I was going to say the late Queen, but to me she'll always be the Queen, for obvious reasons. And I wanted to get hold of this because it gives you a sense of how treasured a grandmother was, not just for that reason, but because of having reached this advanced age. Now, this is what the grandmother is going to look after. This is the ideal of a grandchild, a fat baby boy. And I stress fat because this wonderful Chinese phrase, hao pang, good and fat, not just fat, but good and fat. Here is this good and fat. Here I think you probably want to talk to a doctor about putting the baby on a diet of some kind, because Western pediatrics doesn't like fat babies. But this is a lovely fat baby. Now, this was actually printed in the 1960s. You'd think it might have some communist affiliation because it was a very radical period. Not a bit of it. This is very traditional. I'm sure you could buy the same thing today, practically. Everybody agrees with that. This is what you really want, is a lusty, this is actually 2 boys there, double happiness. I myself have one wonderful granddaughter and 2 wonderful boys, but the son preference has been slow to disappear. I've mentioned that already. Now, the next one, or the one before, sorry, now this is, many of you recognize this phrase. I want to stress again the strength of the love of grandmothers. This is sometimes translated into English as the apple of one's eye, which means next to nothing, right? Well, what's the apple of your eye? But would somebody like to give me a translation of what the Chinese actually says? The treasure of your heart and liver. This is something so visceral. It's completely physically connected to your love. And I put that in because, as many of you know, the Chinese language is full of proverbs, chengyu, we call them all the time, and they express a great range of feelings. But I love this as expressing the love of a grandchild, because when I hear somebody saying, oh, she must be the apple of your eye, I mean, it doesn't mean a lot to me. And, but this one is powerful. So I wanted to put that in. And now, though, next, we're coming to the most famous grandson of all. So if we could go down 2 again. Okay, everybody, this is the ideal grandson. This is the grandson everybody wants to have. Anybody like to tell me what Liu Simu does? Actor. What else? Partly he went to my daughter's school, so, but not at the same time. But this is one of the very first, they now call him Asian Canadian or Asian American actors. He's appeared in all kinds of Marvel movies, which I tend not to watch except for him. He's the epitome of good looks. He's from northeast China, from Dongbei, but obviously some of you will recognize he is of Shandong origin. We have some Shandong people with us. All the most handsome men in China are from, and some of the film stars are from, no, it's true. You just go through the list. Anyhow, he had a reasonably successful school and undergraduate career in Toronto. Then he became an accountant. I have to be careful here with what I'm saying. And he went to work at Deloitte and Touche. And after 9 months, he was fired for non-attendance. So he fulfilled his parents' dreams. So now he's destitute. He couldn't tell his parents what had happened. But he gradually built up, starting at children's parties, he built up a wonderful career, and now he is using his accounting skills to run a major project on getting investment in startups. This boy, if we could have the one before, sorry, this is what he had to say about his upbringing. Not by his parents. His parents left him in Harbin when he was 2 or 3 months old. They moved to Canada, and when he was 5, they came to collect him. the first 5 years, you have to read, this is all his book, it's called We Were Dreamers. I don't know whether it's been translated into Chinese, he probably could do it. He spent 5 idyllically happy years with these 2 old people, both of them professors. He slept every night between them. It was so charming. He was there, we used to call him a living hot water bottle, right? They was warm and comfy. They spent every hour of every day with him. And then suddenly, he's brought to, I wouldn't say cold environment, because Harbin's probably colder than Toronto, but he is in a really tough, harsh, unhappy environment, competing mercilessly to get into the best school in Toronto, to get into the best university. His mother pushing him. I won't go into any more detail. But what does he write in his book? These people he loves, the love in his life came from his grandparents. And I find that so touching when I read about him first in the school magazine. So I've been following him for slightly longer than many people. But he is, without question, the model now for grandparents. Now, whether he hasn't done right by his mother yet, girls who are unmarried, he is still waiting to do the right thing and produce a grandson for her. But that's another thing that we'll have to look at. So I've been talking about what grandmothers mean in the family, but I wanted to say something about what grandmothers can expect of their own lives. China is, except for a brief period, has held very strictly to Confucian values of respect for the old. And they're back strongly now in current day China. The respect covers a huge range of different things. One is, without question, respect. And this is a grandmother whom somebody in this room will recognize. This is the grandmother of Dr. Maurice Wong, and the whole wonderful Wong clan, one of the most important groups in the Chinese-Canadian community here. I wanted to show that picture. I looked at many pictures again, because this woman is so self-confident. She's very plainly dressed, but beautiful clothing. She has undoubtedly jade earrings. I'm pretty sure that she's a woman in her late years who is completely sure of herself and is sitting above a family, some of them in China, some of them here, who obviously adored her. And I wanted to show that because you don't see quite so many pictures like this of maybe of the Queen, but not of people who are so completely self-assured in old age. After that, though, after her, I want to go to a very different old woman. And this is a peasant lady in Shandong in the 1930s. And here you can see a very battered woman. I have to say to Dr. Wong, a woman who clearly doesn't have any teeth anymore, I think, as would be the case then, most people, elderly people, would have lost most of their teeth. But again, she's beautiful. She's poor as could be. These were taken by a Canadian missionary, the set of photographs from which this is one. And they show somebody who was, again, completely self-confident. She's happy to be photographed. She doesn't mind. She's unadorned except for her earrings and a button in the middle of her thing. And she knows exactly who she is. So I found that, as I say, the beauty of old age. And I've got one more. This is a much more modern picture. It's a woodcut print, and it's done by somebody who I'm proud to say is in this room, Qing, one of Canada's most famous artists, and he allowed me to use this. This is painted cut in the 1970s, Qing, or 1980s, yes. This is a woman in Sichuan, deeply lined. Her face she's obviously had a very harsh life, but again, her expression, she's not ashamed, she's not cast down. She has got, even in a very poor family, a sense of pride and a sense that that she has lived a good life. Now, one of the things that all of these women have done is obviously had families that love. This is a message to all of you who are slightly younger, immensely important, never forget, and the old people have the right to remind you all the time. If a family has an old person, even one old person, they have a golden treasure. Now, this comes in all kinds of different formats. I was astounded by how many different origins it has, but the message is clear. You have got a golden treasure, and you must look after them. This is a message which is at every level of society. It starts with within the family, what you do for the family. And I couldn't find a photograph, but I've seen it often. I loved it. The young men in the family may expect to carry their grandmother piggyback, to carry them. It's very touching. I used to see that all the time. There's an old girl being carried by her grandsons, and that's a sign of respect again. She would be served first at the meal, right? Or the grandfather too. She would have, in North China, where people slept on clay platforms which had a stove at one end, a kang, she would be the one who was closest to the stove. So she'd have the warmest place, and poor old young men would be right down the bottom, and the coldest place. She had every possible privilege and every possible kindness. She was also completely looked after by her descendants. She would have no pension, obviously, since she'd had worked for money, but they were responsible for everything in her life, and that continued. And everything was quite a wide range. When I said that the Wang's grandmother was undoubtedly had jade earrings, one of the things a family had to do was buy suitable pieces of jade for the older people. And I'd done that more than once in Beijing, going looking for jade with a friend of mine, which was suitable for, in fact, for her mother's birthday. And she was considered, she got many congratulations from the salespeople for being so filial. But much more important, the children and the grandchildren are the parents' pensions. Even today, traditionally there was no pension system at all, and today the pension system is weak, to put it mildly, unless you're a Communist Party member. Now, a lot of people are, so we'll take them out of the equation, the odd 100 million people. But I don't know whether it's quite that number, but it's very large. But other people, especially if they've been peasants or had worked in state-owned enterprises which went bankrupt, they don't have any pension. So their pension are their children. The same applies to healthcare. If you want good healthcare, you should join the Communist Party. If not, you will. Some work has good coverage. Some work has very poor coverage. Your family is what you will depend on. Now, that's all linked into this thing of a society that's based on respect for the elderly. I used to ask my students when I was teaching still at UBC, I'd say, who's going to look after your parents when they're old? And they said, well, they've got Canada pension. And I'd say, no, but if you were in China, it would be you. They'd all look, they'd fall off their seats practically in horror, the thought that they would have to be providing for their parents. Now, that's only one part of it, but it, I think, is, you have to say, is a very important part. It is up to the parents, therefore. I want just to mention, this is some of the explicit instructions, which still appear today, as all, you can all see. While your parents are alive, do not go far away. Guess who said that? Anybody like to guess who said that in his general comments about how to live one's life? Confucius. Oh, 2,000 years, right? This has been the rule. And if you try and work out another way around it, you are being unfilial. Now, this wasn't the extreme. The next one, I think. Look at this. This is extreme filial piety, and it's a bit difficult to translate. For anybody like to have a go? Nobody should try this. Don't try this at home. If you're in a place, basically what it says, if you're in a place where there are a lot of mosquitoes, expose your own skin to save your parents. So there are a lot of mosquitoes around, which often are, and your parents might be bitten. The only way you can save them is by exposing your skin. This is just a new version of this has just been republished, the obligations. Can we go to the next one? I love this one. And I have the ideal person here to whom this applies. This is the modern 24. There are 24 obligations for looking after your parents. The first lot were published in the Yuan dynasty, so almost 1,000 years ago. The modern ones have all kinds of different obligations, one of which I've been a happy recipient of, and that is to teach your parents basically how to use computers and how to get onto the web and whatnot. And many of the present-day ones are these very technical ones. Those of us who don't have, people who don't have children and grandchildren to help them do this kind of thing are really hard up nowadays in my age group. In fact, I've got a colleague who's completely out of touch because he's just, everything has gone too far for him. And he's got no, he did buy a cell phone, but he didn't realize you had to charge it. So he's never been able to get it to work. So, but in China, this is stipulated. This is an obligation. Now, the elderly have obligations in the opposite direction. If you're going to, you've got to keep healthy. So how do you do this? You eat a lot of bean curd, and you... anybody like to guess where I got this from? Many of you, place many of you have been to. This is the little place setting at the Noodle House on Broadway. You know, I hope you've all been there. They've suffered so much, but on Broadway in Maine, there's a Konji Noodle House. And this is their place setting. Eat more bean curd, right, and noodles. And next one more. And the same kind of thing. It's the same place. Eat more garlic and keep yourself healthy, whatever happens. So I like the idea that there's an obligation to the an obligation to the elderly as well. And then one last one, I think. This is a warning. Don't get too self-confident, you elderly. Just because Confucius said that you've got to stay at home to look after your elderly, don't forget that he also said, if you grow old and don't die, that's been like a thief. Now, I've checked this several times because I actually couldn't believe he'd said it, but he did. So this is a mutual thing in a way, and that's what brings me back to the idea of why being a grandparent is so wonderful. You love the grandchildren, they love you, and then back and forth, you have this wonderful relationship. In some ways, it means that the role of the parent is quite different because the parent is the one who has to be strict with the children. The parent is the one who has to worry about their future. And to me, though, as a grandmother myself, 3 times over, this is a wonderful stage of life. I think it's, to me, also a very important understanding of how families work when they're multi-generational, rather than being just 2 generations. And so altogether, I've just loved everybody I've met for a book while I was writing the book. I asked them about their grandparents. They almost always say, "Oh, she was so lovely." And funnily enough, this was true of Westerners as well as Chinese. But it struck me again as odd that this very central loving relationship should somehow have gone under the radar for scholars anyhow. Mm-hmm. They're always interested in parent-child or husband and wife and something else. And I'm afraid I've got no idea what time it is or how long I've been going on.
Okay.
Is it, because it was just about what we hoped for, right?
Yeah.
So, Jing, you and I were going to have some discussions, right?
Yeah. Do you like to keep going for 20?
No, I'd like to hear from you a bit as well.
This is the style of Diana's talk. Casual, relaxed, and full of fun. 他怕时间掌握不好，说我们上来讨论吧。既然他已经分享了这么多对中国的 grandmothers 的这个印象和评论，看大家有什么问题。或有什么不同
Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for your talk, Dr. Larry. It's absolutely wonderful talk. Just an observation, I guess. I really like the comparison you made with the images, the pictures, right, of the beauty of old age, and the Wang family matriarch, right? One of the things that I found was really interesting between the 2 women in those photos is the fact that the northern woman from the 30s, right, taken by the missionary, she's smiling in the photo. Like, she's like visibly happy. That really struck me because, like, for me, a lot of the archival photos back in the day, like in the 30s and even earlier, right, people don't tend to smile that much. Right, and we can see that it's sort of like a convention almost for the Wang family matriarch, right? She's got this very stern, a self-assured look to her, right? But she's not really smiling. Like, she doesn't express her happiness, like through her, I suppose, like just like facial expression, right? It's like almost inborn. It almost comes with the fact that she's like a matriarch figure. She's a grandmother. Like, that itself is like her happiness is like self-evident to a degree. Whereas like the northern woman in the other photo, right? She actively expresses her happiness, like she's smiling.
This is in the history of photography in a way. The Wang's grandmother, that was a photograph taken in a studio, undoubtedly, and taken probably to celebrate a birthday or one of the big birthdays. The wonderful thing, everybody, as they get older, every 10 years they have a really big birthday, 60大寿, 70大寿, 80大寿. And if you get to 100, it goes almost bananas. But that was a studio photo, whereas the one of the smiling old lady, this was taken by a Canadian missionary who, I don't know how much he did in the way of converting, but he spent a lot of time just going around taking snapshots of people, what would now be called snapshots. So I love his pictures, and they show you a world which very few of the other pictures, the portrait pictures, do.
Absolutely, and I just love this photo so much in the sense that, in a way, she almost reminds me of my great-grandmother. Just her smile and like her headdress too. Like she used to have one of those things as well, and I can tell like her earring, right, in particular.
Yes.
I don't think that's jade. I think that's some type of metal, like either silver or gold. I would assume, but you know, absolutely right. It's got that shine to it. So yeah,
yes,
no, it's,
I couldn't. Yes, it's very important to give your grandmother's earrings. By the way, anybody of you who haven't should remember this.
But yeah, no, that's just an observation from me. Thank you so much for that.
Yes.
Diana 就是回答，就是说，一个是在这个影楼里边去拍的照，很正式的场合的，所以他就正襟危坐；还有一个就是传教士在到处随意拍的，很自然的北方的这个老太太的这个形象，所以区别很大。And there's another question from the lady. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Lary. I loved it. I loved your book. I've read it twice. I think it's wonderful. I'm lucky enough to be a grandmother twice over. And I was just listening to the news the other day, and they were saying that China has now had more deaths than births for the first time ever in its history. And so it made me think of your book and realize, you know, there may be so many people that will never have grandchildren and not become grandmothers. And so what are your thoughts for the future of a kind of a different kind of China?
My first thought is that I think I'd be quite doubtful about the statistics because one of the problems is just the collecting of the statistics, but the other big problem is previous statistics, which were anything but reliable. The other thing is people are living much longer. That's the real problem in China. They had what used to be called, since they had the one child per family policy, which is now gone, but was in force for quite a long while, meant that two parents had to look after one child and 4 grandparents, right? So that's what the 8-4-1 problem, the 8-4-1 problem. Added to that now, the longevity's gone up fantastically. People are living into their 80s and 90s quite routinely now. So now you've got probably not 16 great-grandparents, but quite a lot of them. And the insurance system, pension system, simply hasn't kept up with it. I mean, China has other spending priorities. I've asked somebody here, I know what percentage of Canadian government spending goes on the social services, including health, pensions, education, and whatnot. And this is somebody, I may say, who worked at the Bank of Canada. He said, it's got to be 60%. And I said, so I take that as a vague operational. In China, this would be much, much, much lower. So I think people will become grandmothers. They may become grandmothers at later ages, although there's still pressure for people to marry fairly young in China. But they will have 4 generations. And of course, that was always the ideal. 四世同堂, 4 generations under one roof. That was when people got married, I hate to say this, but in their mid-teens. And were mothers-in-law or grandmothers in their early 30s. Now, the ages would be much higher. Teenage marriage is almost unheard of now. It's a problem everywhere. And my mother was a grandmother when she was in her late 40s, which is standard at the time. And my younger sister wasn't a grandmother till she was in her 70s, which is also about standard for now. So, and there's a happy grandchild at the back. So you can't tell when it's going to happen. But I would doubt it. I don't think that's going to disappear as a relationship. It also hasn't disappeared in terms of childcare. Because one slide I put up, but I didn't talk to, was called the village with an empty heart, Kongshin de Tsun. The factory workers in China, the people who go away from home to work, we're talking about, again, a very vague figure, but possibly 200 million, maybe less, maybe more. They leave their children behind. And actually, in the book, I got a lot of information from the reports put out by the government about what the problem that they'd say about the left behind children, liu shou artong, children who've been left in the villages. They were only looking for problems, so it was a pretty grim reading, you know, children saying, I wish my grandmother didn't beat me so much. You think how many, they took figures of the number of children who had said this kind of thing. The grandparents who said, I don't mind 1 or 2, but I can't look after 8 grandchildren that they were trying to look after. So this is a pretty grim picture, and it's not the happy kind of picture that I was trying to present to you. So I would say be very careful about the statistics. I think you may find that last quotation from Confucius about to grow old and not die could be considered a thief. That may come back, but at my age, I can hardly talk about such a thing.
Do we have more questions from the audience? Yeah, at the back.
Hi, Professor. I want to elaborate my personal experience because I brought my kids here today.
Yes,
I have my challenge right now. The challenge for me is how to balance the Western style and the Chinese tradition. I live with my parents right now. We have 3 generations in the same house. So sometimes, like, my parents help me to take care of kids as well. So it was very normal for me when I was a kid. I grew up in China, the small town. We have 4 generations living in the same, very nearby. We didn't expect a lot of conflicts, like especially the value conflicts. But today, especially in here, my wife was from city and I was from small town. Like, it's very rare for me to bring in actually to live with parents together. So for me, it's very challenging to balance like the industrialized value or individualism and Chinese traditional value, family value. So I want to ask you, from your experience, how to balance that? What's your view?
Well, I really deeply sympathize with you, and I think it's a problem for everybody now. The expectation has become that a couple and their children live separately from their parents. And that's that's what people in Chinese cities hope for now. They don't necessarily want to have, a young couple, both with good jobs. Maybe they can get a nanny, a baomu, but that's become extraordinarily expensive. Some of the people who study at UBC, I always love this, the graduate students often had brought their parents to live with them, but the parents were retired, so it was no problem. But there's a growing feeling amongst parents, grandparents, that this is the time of their life when they're going to travel, they're going to have experiences, they may marry again if they've been widowed or divorced. The wonderful dating sites for the elderly, I find it a bit cringe-making, but the last thing they want to do is look after some kids. So it's a problem across the board, and obviously here in this province it's a huge problem because the government has promised cheap childcare and hasn't delivered. That's a message to Mr. Eby, which is a terrible thing. Some countries have sorted it out brilliantly, Scandinavian ones most of all. I think other than that, it's something that people should campaign about, getting decent childcare, affordable childcare, ones in which the grandparents can participate somehow, but it is hard for a grandparent to look after a child for 50 weeks of the year, which is what somebody who's gone south to work would have to do. When I say gone south, I'm to people who've gone south and east. And I think I was a loving grandmother, but even one or two, I remember with my daughter who's not here, I remember her saying, can you look after the boys for the weekend? And they were 3 and 4, 3 and 5 at the time, and I said, I don't think so. I just didn't think I could manage it on my own. And she was deeply offended because I was saying I'd have to get somebody in to help me. That's what I was supposed to say, but I didn't get it out. So you're in an awkward situation. The sad thing is, it'll pass very quickly, though. I would say the sad thing, those of us who look back and see our little children when they were so gorgeous and loving, and then we look at the teenagers and think, oh, that was such a short phase, being when we had little ones. So take lots of photographs, and you'll feel that you were happy most of the time with them. And you just have to go through it. And I would say really seriously campaign with the provincial government, because they have done it in Quebec, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be done here.
UBC. Okay. There's a gentleman
Yes,
in the middle.
Professor, I'd like to ask for your opinion and observation about the changing value of the younger generation in terms of their filial piety. And because nowadays the younger generation, either in the Chinese community or in the Western society, they don't necessarily follow the so-called filial piety any longer or observe it as much.
Well, I quite agree with you about that, but I would stretch when you say nowadays, because in fact, this has been going on since the late Qing dynasty, when China was a very weak country, and people, the young radicals, you can even push it a bit further back if you want, started complaining about, they blamed the Confucian system for China's weakness. I'm not saying whether they were right or not. And they rebelled against their parents, even more against their grandparents. And they rebelled against lots of different aspects of society. I was happy to give you a picture of Bai Chongxi, because Bai Chongxi, although this was the 1940s, he was a very, very rare man who only had one wife. The young rebelled against polygamy. They hated the thought that their fathers, if they were successful, had many wives. And Bai Chongxi was almost on his own in that respect, in the Kuomintang. And the communist leaders didn't have polygamy, but they had many wives in succession, often. Liu Shaoqi had 6 wives in quick succession. You know, it's almost Hollywood level, but if that's fair. So I think it's difficult to insist on filial piety. I would have to say amongst my friends, our children have been wonderful to us. I wouldn't have a single word to criticize, and I think my friends would agree.
That's really funny.
I think the elderly have to adapt somewhat. They can't insist on it anymore. They can't insist that their children do all the little things they want them to. And I would say quite often it needs a lot of discussion rather than assuming a child is going to do this, that, or the other for their parents. You have to talk about it more. Sometimes parents also do much too much for their children. They want their children, they want to, not just to, they're willing to pay for support for their children. One thing I always object to here, they're buying their grandchildren sports cars, which I think is lethal, literally. I don't think you can't go backwards, but you can change things to produce much more in the way of loving relationships and caring relationships. I think that with the Chinese or non-Chinese insisting that your children behave in a certain way, I'm afraid that's gone. You have the first 15 years of their life when they have to do what you want to. And after that, you have to go to a different level. So I hope that's not a disappointing answer, but yes.
For example, you mentioned that maybe the
我
government
能
should...
先翻译一下吗？给大家很快的，就是讨论这个孝道，就是讲到 grandmothers 的时候，很自然的就想到了这个传统价值观的改变。那个 Lary 教授的书就是从近代开始写起，他就说在晚清革命派里边已经就是打破了传统的儒教的什么孝道这些了，不是现在或者说当代人中西方之间什么有就开始不那个，还有他就是鼓励大家也不要坚持，也不要要求孩子，还有就是父母长辈们的行为也会有影响。如果你一心他要什么就给什么，他要跑车你就给的话，那不一定这样培养出来的下一代会遵循这个孝道了。那请您继续，再问一个问题，我们很快的。
Okay, so quickly, you mentioned that we would want the government to help us out in terms of childcare, that we
Yes.
should ask, Premier Eby to be doing more for that. By doing so, I mean, for those still have parents, wouldn't that weaken the link between the grandparents and the child, the grandson or granddaughter?
Well, one possibility, and I don't know where they've tried it, but it has been talked about, is paying grandparents to look after their grandchildren. I mean, it would have to be looked at carefully, but I think it's, it's quite a reasonable thing. And with the children of the migrant workers in China, I once was interviewing some mothers, the migrant mothers, and they all were saying how they missed their children and how hard it was on their own parents to look after the children. And the person from the All China Women's Federation, I thought she was going to kill me practically. She was so angry about this, getting this kind of criticism. And then she said they're paying the grandparents to look after the children. And you can see it like that. They are. These are people back in the villages who don't have pensions. They're peasants. And their income is what the children send home every week and every month. So it's complicated, but I think it would be a good idea to do it almost anywhere. If there is a suitable grandparent available, then you'd have to work out what is a suitable grandparent.
Lary 教授同意，就是说，与其来增加这个对孩子的 抚养下一代的这优惠政策，还不如就付这个 grandparents 这个费用来那个带他们自己的 grandchildren。我觉着我们继续这样回答问题的话，好像Diana还没有讲完。我们要感谢Diana出来的这个 poster， 这个
Can we
theme，
just do this?
对。
You just mentioned a good way possibly to have an innovation from for the use of grandmothers, but this is the innovation I most want to see here. You'll all recognize this is a great friend of mine doing the 3 bows, standby, before my parents' grave. She loved my parents, they loved her. This is a little English churchyard, not very well kept up, I'm sorry to say. And in this classic English grave, there are actually 5 people. I sort of a bit embarrassed about that. The English reused graves. So it's my grandfather, his first wife, my grandmother, and my parents are all in here. And she came and she did this beautiful, respectful thing. Otherwise, if we wanted to kneel down, we'd have to kneel in the mud, right, in the grass. Or we're not quite sure what to do when you go to the grave. But this is something I'd like to see everywhere, the standby. And you see it, most of you know, the 3 bows, you do it in a memorial, you do it to respect for somebody, and I love that. I feel a bit guilty that we haven't tidied the grave up, but there's no such thing in England. An irresponsible, oh, look at that. My grandmother, one of my grandmothers, she was nothing but love. She adored us all. She was a woman who'd never gone to school. She was more or less, she's Irish, more or less, she wasn't illiterate, but she could write, but she never done any punctuation. A common thing that one finds in student essays, but this is her letters. She was nothing but love. She just adored us all. As you see, I was lucky to get her hair. But what was the next one? Because that might be, oh yes, this is a very different kettle of fish. This is my other grandmother, who was as tough as nails and very, very firm in her views of everything. She was, and this is a bad, we talked about son preference. She didn't have any grandsons, which was her most bitter regret in her life. She had 5 granddaughters. And so what she went for was favorites. I was lucky to be one of her favorites. She only had 2 favorites out of her 5 granddaughters. But you can see probably this, and this, I have to point out this to Anna. This is my daughter, the ghastly, Parker. Could be Parker. Parker. It's a Jack Russell Terrier who always bit me. And Anna had an equally ghastly one later on, but whom she loved.
That's not very well.
And this, my most favorite of all, and I'll end with that, I hope my mother, who was the world's greatest grandmother, nobody ever did better than her, and her great-granddaughter, Mabel. My mother's name was Mabel, and my daughter named her first child, Mabel, which in Chinese is a wonderful name. It's Maybao. And you find in any Chinese communities, you'll find which means beautiful treasure. So Maybao couldn't, so this is the 2 Mabels, my mother and my granddaughter, and Maybao is, as I say, the most wonderful name, but not only that, it expresses again what a treasure both the child and the grandmother, and a great-grandmother in this case was. So she was a very, very happy great-grandmother, but she didn't have enough. She used to complain that she'd only got, when she died, she had, I think, 7 great-grandchildren. And she said, Mrs. B, her great friend, has got 19 grandchildren, let alone great-grand. That's another thing I get into a bit in the books. So I'm sure that's exactly the same in China, that people will whip out their phones and say, look at this, isn't that the most handsome boy you've ever seen? And of course you have to agree. So I just say thank you all for coming, but also thank you very much for the questions, and thank you for being a grandmother and stimulating me to work on what turned out to be really the most terrific fun. I've enjoyed it enormously doing this. And thank you, Jing. And
Thank you.
Diane, for arranging it.
Yeah， 感谢Diane 出来的那个 poster 的那个 theme 就是 gentle pillar，right？ 我们 Diana Lary 教授在他的家里就是这样一个温柔的支柱 gentle pillar。然后尽管有一些 challenges， 但是他还是可以这么酷、这么 sweet， 跟我们一起来谈他这本书。我们大家一起再感谢他一次，好不好？